speakers tonight. So I'm going to try to be brief because I would sort of put what I'm talking about tonight in maybe a little bit more of sort of technical assistance, understanding some semantics, and really want to talk about, I really want to get to the other speakers tonight who are really, I would define all of them as heroes of the labor movement. And so I'm really excited to hear from them. But before we get there, I just want to talk a little bit about some things that we sometimes conflate when we talk about the labor movement. And this is particularly the case when we're dealing with teachers unions that are, for the most part, are public sector unions because teachers are public sector workers for the most part, and differentiating between the legal issues of right to work versus state collective bargaining rights, and when each applies and why they matter. So if you could just forward to the next slide. Probably the term that everybody has heard about is right to work. And we use that term a lot. And sometimes we use it in ways that aren't really accurate. But right to work laws are state laws that became legal under the National Labor Relations Act as a result of the 1947 Taft-Hartley amendments to the then Wagner Act, which combined with Landrum-Griffin makes up the NLRA. In essence, this amendment, and specifically 14B of the NLRA today, states or allows states to prohibit agency or union shop agreements. And what that means is it allows union members in the private sector to opt out of paying any dues to their union. This includes agency fees, or what we refer to oftentimes as fair share fees. This, of course, weakens unions. It weakens union presence. And while this specifically only applies in the private sector, there's a spillover effect into the public sector, because when you have a weak labor movement in your state, it weakens unions and it weakens workers across the board. So the next slide. Right to work states started off in the South, and you can see it's still heavy in the South. All of the southern states on the east side of the US are right to work states, but it's becoming the norm. It has spread to the Midwest, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana. Ohio had right to work legislation, but under the Ohio Constitution, you had to go to a vote, and the voters did not vote that legislation in. Still part of legislative packages that come forward. My own state where I live today, Pennsylvania, it comes up all the time. My state where I practice law, West Virginia, also comes up all of the time, maybe even passed in West Virginia at some point. But this, again, this is private sector. What is more important for most of you, and you can see a list of right to work states there as well, and these slides will be available. And also, if you have questions at the end, I can answer any of those after the entire webinar. But what's more important to us is the public sector, or for most of you is the public sector. And the reality is that due to the Janus case, those of us in the public sector, I'm also in the public sector, I'm a faculty member in the state system in Pennsylvania. The Janus decision makes all of us right to work workers. The Supreme Court said that, spending on union dues, that money is fungible. So no matter what it's going to, you don't have to pay that in, because having to pay that in would be a violation of your First Amendment rights. And so when we talk about right to work, we're all right to work. What is even more important for us are state collective bargaining laws. And state collective bargaining laws vary for public sector workers. They range anywhere from mirroring the National Labor Relations Act to prohibiting collective bargaining. And again, it's important to keep in mind that if you're a public sector worker, National Labor Relations Act doesn't apply to you. You have to know what your state labor laws are. And if you go to the next slide, I think it's the next one. Yeah, so this shows you sort of what I would call 4 categories of your state collective bargaining laws. You have laws that look a lot like the National Labor Relations Act. We have those in Pennsylvania. You have laws that provide some rights, but less than the National Labor Relations Act. The first state that had public sector collective bargaining rights, Wisconsin, now falls into that second category. They still have rights to negotiate over limited issues, but that's it. Then you have no law, where states are silent. West Virginia is silent, public sector collective bargaining laws. And then you have laws that actually prohibit collective bargaining. Virginia is an example of this, and North Carolina is also an example. So we can see collective bargaining prohibited in Missouri, North Carolina, Virginia, Texas, no law, a number of states, protected but limited in a number of states as well. And then we have a few states that mirror the National Labor Relations Act. And we'll go ahead to the next slide. Some states differentiate for teachers, but these are states that are protected broadly, that mirror the National Labor Relations Act. If you fall into these states, you can, you'll have a lot of the same standards that we see in the private sector. Just to give you one example, in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Labor Relations Board has specifically ruled that where there are no decisions interpreting our state labor laws, that they'll follow whatever the NLRB has decided or what the federal courts have decided in terms of interpreting the National Labor Relations Act. And then we'll go to the next slide. The other big piece of what we see in public sector laws deals with the right to strike. And again, states vary. Even if they have collective bargaining rights in many states, public sector workers don't have a right to strike. Some states like New York penalize striking workers, or at least can penalize under their statutes. Oftentimes they don't, or they negotiate before they return to waive those penalties. But you know, some states do allow strikes. Some states allow striking for certain workers. Some states prohibit strikes and allow ADR instead, arbitration instead. New York also has an arbitration clause that you can go to. Just to give you a couple of examples, prohibited with penalty, you see it's a large number of states: Delaware, Florida, Indiana, Iowa, Maine, Maryland, states even that we think of as having strong employee rights. Maryland would be one, New York would be one. We see not so strong when it comes to allowing public sector workers to really use the only leverage that we have when it comes to collective bargaining, and that is the strike leverage. So that sort of gives you this in a nutshell. The idea of differentiating, understanding what we mean by right to work, how that applies to the private sector, understanding the importance of knowing your state labor laws, because those are what are going to apply to you as a teacher. And the other thing that we see with state labor laws, they're very fluid. As administrations turn over, laws change much more than what we see at the federal level. So the best advice I can give you is, when in doubt, look up your labor law, know what it covers, know what it doesn't cover. But at the same time, as we'll hear, I hope, from a little bit later, don't let that limit you either. Because when we talk about the strike weight of 18 to 20, many of those strikes are what we would define as illegal, unlawful, or unprotected under state labor laws. So we can always take concerted activity, but it has to be based around solidarity and not depending on the law to protect us. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Jamie to introduce the next speaker. I'm one of the hero of mine, Melissa.
Thanks, Jerry, so much. Next, I'd like to introduce you Melissa Tomlinson. She's the director of the Badass Teachers Association, and she's going to discuss organizing NJ21 United.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Jamie. So NJ21 United is kind of the latest form of caucus that we've been building in New Jersey pretty much since we started Badass Teachers Association. And then I recognized the need to kind of strengthen the collective power of the union from within. So I just started making connections. And Jamie, if you'll go to the next slide. And we got involved with different national kind of organizations. I became involved with the UCOR network, working with labor notes. And then, of course, came Red for Ed. So we went from New Jersey Bats, which is still active and a source of information, and then a group of us formed a group in South Jersey called SJ United, South Jersey United. And what we did was, our main purpose was to go to boards of education and districts where they were looking at contracts to privatize the paraprofessionals or the cafeteria workers or the bus drivers, so anything outsourcing. So we went and we became a voice for the staff and employees that felt that they could not stand up and speak because they were afraid of retribution within their own district. So we became pretty successful in fighting back a lot of privatization, so successful that the union ended up taking it on as a model and now has an anti-privatization coalition within the union. So once they did that, you know, we kind of moved on. So how NJ 21 United works is the main caucus group is kind of organized as a strategy team. And then we have a public Facebook group where it is union members with community members having conversations about supporting public education. The caucus itself does a lot of union business, trying to kind of direct decisions for the union using our member voice, our rank and file voice, by participating at our state delegate assembly, which happens 5 times a year. We have kind of easier flow of communication than union channels. Sometimes we're able to get things out there faster because we can just blast it right out there. We're working on encouraging a lot of people that we're connected with in getting involved in the union, showing them how to do that. And then we're also working to build coalition partners. One group that we just became coalition partners with is Divest NJ Coalition. So we're working on getting our state pension to divest from fossil fuels. So some campaigns that we've been involved in since we've started, we pushed the state union to launch a Refuse Park campaign. We, like I said, started attending against privatization. A couple years ago, we passed a new business item for the union to call for transparency and accountability of charter schools, which has led to this year several policy and resolution changes, which strengthens our support about transparency and accountability in these charters. We passed a couple NBIs for the union to support the Black Lives Matter at School movement, first with the public statement and then also with funding to back up that public statement for the different activities. And right now we're working in the middle of a campaign fighting against one of our senators has this path to poverty agenda where he wants to change our pension and our benefits.
Thank you so much for sharing, Mel. Next up is Brittany Alexander. She's going to be discussing with us organizing the Ohio Education Association's BAT Caucus.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I am looking here and see that we're starting off with the motivation piece. So that ties in perfectly with what Jerry mentioned earlier in his introduction statements. For me personally, I will say, I became very motivated to get into union work when John Kasich, our former, thank you, governor, launched the Senate Bill 5 attack, which was, you know, basically right to work for all public sector unions in our state. And actually, technically, I think later he went back and said, we want to make it more like Wisconsin and what Scott Walker did and ask the police and fire, you know, we could take you out of that. And they, you know, were very firm in standing with us and saying, no, you poked the bear. So we did overturn that through our state referendum process, and we across the state, union members were very active in wanting to help with the efforts to help that happen. So that started my activism in the union, and then BATS was formed, and that really helped me kind of see the bigger picture of how I can be more involved and help, help push a more progressive agenda within our unions. So I did see then from there, NEA BAT Caucus was formed, and then the Washington BAT Caucus was formed, and those helped to guide. I thought, if they can do it, we can do it. And we began working that whole process. So that takes us into the organizing piece. We had been doing the work that we currently do of the caucus for roughly 2 years prior to the being officially recognized, so that allowed us to have the platform be seen prior to that process going underway. We did go through the Constitution and bylaws and the board policy of OEA and reached out to the leadership of OEA, and were able to get information about how to go about forming a caucus and officially being recognized. That constituted of actually writing a constitution and bylaws for the caucus. We were required to have, and this probably depends upon your state, constitution and bylaws within your union, and we had 100 members that we had to confirm prior to being recognized. And we were approved by the board 2 years ago, and so we are in our third year now. Some of the things that we've been able to accomplish as we've moved through that time are a few business items. We had a few new business items passed that were caucus approved, legislative amendments, and then even more recently in December at our representative assembly, we had 5 additional legislative amendments since creating the documents for this presentation. So we have had quite a bit of success. Currently, we have 3 of our 4 caucus officers who serve on the OEA Legislative Committee. And so instead of always bringing those items to the floor, we were able to bring them through the committee and making that process more transparent. We were able to get fine-tune the language to help it pass more easily. So that kind of goes along with the bottom bullet point there about working within the system and learning how things work. That's really what we have found is to be the key. And we're continuing to build our collective power and building relationships with our union family. So we continue to grow, and I look forward to the work that we will do in the future. And
Thanks
thank
so
you
much
for the chance to talk to you about it.
Thanks so much, Brittany, for sharing what's going on in Ohio and how you badass organized that state. Moving on to another badass organizer in Washington State. Next up is Keitha Bryson.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to start with a slide that Wilma helped me introduce. Next slide, Jamie. In this picture, you're looking at State Superintendent Chris Reichdahl talking to a group of Washington BATs. This was last year. We also met with him December 9th. Becca Ritchie had talked to her state senator, and we had 2 bills pre-filed with the legislature before the session started in January. And one of the bills was to delink testing from graduation requirements so that students didn't have to take the test and pass it to graduate. And the other one was eliminating a teacher assessment during the Danielson frameworks for evaluation, which was causing a lot of teachers problems. I personally have a friend here in Washington who went through that experience, and it's traumatic. So both of those bills have actually been pre-filed with Senator Bob Hasagawa. The other thing I would like to take back about talking with your elected officials is recently at a retired teachers group, one of the presenters was a man who was talking about the Freedom Foundation, which is related to the Koch brothers, asking for private information about teachers and educators, both retired and in action.
Daddy.
And so anyway, one of the things that happened with that is 3 years ago with Becca, we were at a court hearing in Thurston County, which is our state capital area. And one of the union members was taking a picture of my conversation with the attorney after the trial was over. And that I told the man about the fact that this video exists, and we're probably going to be able to take the Freedom Foundation to court with it. So we're very happy about that. Next slide, please. The other strategies that we've used in the state are with the Backbone campaign for media messages. Backbone campaign is on Vashon Island. And if you ever need big street overhead lighting signs like these, they do ship them all over the United States. In fact, they've shipped them all over the world. Most of you have probably seen the Donald Trump in diapers. That originated with this Backbone campaign. The sign above the overhead pass, we stood out in a very rich neighborhood near Microsoft. And what it says is Microsoft dodges $8 billion worth of taxes in Washington state. And people were honking and giving us high fives and cheering as they passed under that underpass. Next picture. In this one, we're doing rallies and marches, and this picture was taken. We're singing in the Capitol building rotunda, so our voices sound magnificent, even if you only have 4 of them. And people stopped to ask us what we were singing about, and the signs in the background are our state constitution talks about fully funding or amply funding public education. And Becca Ritchie, who has the guitar in her hands, she's usually what we call our lead bat and organizes these events. This was very effective because we got other people to realize how much funding hadn't been done for public education. Next slide. This march is a march between Westlake Park in downtown Seattle and the Gates Foundation. Anthony Cody was our speaker at the rally right outside of the foundation. And we had a permit to do the march for a little over a mile, I think. And it was really a lot of fun. We got a lot of mileage out of it. And people who were downtown actually walked with us to the Gates Foundation to listen to the speech. So that was a great idea. So the last thing I have to say, because I think this one is my last slide, yes. The last thing I have to say is I have been teaching a nonpartisan civics engagement class, and my classes always start, I have no idea how you vote, and you don't know how I vote, but I'm pretty certain that we have common things we want our elected officials to do. One of our state senators is on the board of this foundation, and she loves it because I haven't gotten into a partisan argument with anybody, and people are starting to realize that the oath of office is very important for an elected official, because even if you are not able to vote, such as children or the homeless or immigrants, you still have a voice with your elected officials. State Senator Manka Dhingra is on that board, and she loves that format. So I'm going to ask all of you to start teaching in your state. Do you know who your elected officials are to people? And even if they're not able to vote, they should have a voice. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Keitha, for sharing Badass Washington State and all your actions. Next up is an incredible BAT leader, Kathy Berry. She also co-facilitates the quality work-life team with me, along with Cheryl Binkley. These two organized Virginia Educators United, and they are about to share that with you.
Thanks, Jamie. There were lots of people involved in organizing VEU. Cheryl and I are just one of many. I'm going to share my screen, if that's okay with you guys. Cheryl, do you want to start us off, and then I'll as soon as I get the screen up, I'll get back in.
Okay, and I'll start with what was going on at the beginning. All around Virginia, which has been a state that has had right to work since 1947 and has had no right to collective bargaining since, depending on who you talk to, 1979 or 1993. They're two different laws. So we don't have much of a track record, but all around us, there were, West Virginia went out and did a strike. Kentucky went out, and North Carolina did a one-day action. And we began in BATS to get all of these questions. When do we go? What are we going to do? We need to do something. And Virginia BATS went from 800 members to 1,860 in 3 months. So we knew we had to do something. So Support Richmond Public Schools and Virginia BATS became the launching groups. And our basic rule was that everyone was welcome who supported public schools, and people were asked to do the things that would help and that fit with their talents so that they would feel good about what they were doing. And that's when we began formulating a plan. Kathy?
Yep. So from the very first, one of the things we wanted to do was to make sure that we had a very broad coalition. So within a very short period of time, we had created the website with tabs. We had established social media accounts, pages on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Google email. We had groups, and we had a Google Drive for a lot of our information. We also had a plan. It was amazing how so much of this worked together. It was like we just would get together and on the phone call, say what needed to happen, and it just did. So we went to our existing union and invited them to be a part. We formulated our needs and demands. We were trying to develop a statewide network with all of our local units, and then create outreach and actions that would help lead to an awareness and also educate and have a response to our demands. So one of our general goals was to strengthen the support in our public schools and in our union. By August, we had actions built in, and then we started putting those out. The culminating action would be at the Capitol on March 28th of last year. It would coincide with Lobby Day, and we started in September with a Wear Red for Ed, and Each One Reach One. Those were fairly successful in some of the districts. One of the things that we had hoped to have happen is have representatives from every district. Didn't quite get that, but we basically funded some of the fees that we had to do for and cost with sale of the t-shirts. As teachers became interested in what we were doing, we collected emails, and people who joined our group or went to the website. We gathered emails and started a weekly email newsletter or information email through outreach, and we called the little weekly things "The More You Know." And part of the reason we had to do that was because so many teachers in Virginia are unaware of the funding formulas in Virginia. A lot of the parents that were involved, there just was not an awareness of what was actually happening in our schools and education. So we have 133 districts, and we reached almost all of them. We had somebody from almost every single district, either in an email or in some way a part of the Virginia Educators United. We did actions like painting cars, paint the town events as they were called. We had the Commonwealth Institute is a think tank in Richmond, and they were amazing with helping us with numbers. Where would the funding come from if we needed to, have a different funding stream, even down to what each district had lost through the recession and the funding and the lack of staff. They were an amazing resource. We also did a light brigade on the bridges at Fund Our Schools, and we're actually doing that again this year. Last year it was mainly in Richmond, as our legislators went back to work in January. This year so far we've had it in, I believe, Richmond, Fairfax. There are, Cheryl, help me, who else has done it already?
Tomorrow it will be in Hampton, and then we were going to do Loudon, but the weather was prohibitive. Charlottesville is planning to do one. So we're doing them all around the state this year.
Yes. Working on one for where I live in Harrisonburg. They're just a lot of fun, and people don't mind volunteering for that. And when you're standing on the sidewalk over an interstate, you find out that there's a lot of people who support you. A lot of horn honking, and it's a fun evening. We also, in my area, there's not a lot of people willing to really step outside of the school and be active because there's the fear of retaliation, believe it or not. And so in my area, we had a group of parents that showed up and did postcard parties to help send postcards to the legislators. And then you want to talk about the march, Cheryl?
Sure. All of this was building toward the march on January 28th. We had done all this outreach about 3 weeks before the march. We confirmed arrangements with Randy Weingarten and Lily Nicholson Garcia to join us as speakers at the march. So there were 2 different locations we would have preliminary speakers and singers, and some of the other things we did besides the ones that were mentioned here was we had like multiple groups that made up songs and made videos that kind of went viral all over the state about fund me, and solidarity songs and that sort of thing. They sang at the march as well as our speakers, and it turned out very successfully. The news coverage said that it was the largest march since the suffragettes had been on the Capitol steps, and we convinced VEA. Go to the next one, Kathy. Let's see what it looks like. This is the beginning of this is the front of the march. There were lots of signs. It was fun going through this because I got to see all of the picture. I got to go through all of the pictures again that people submitted to the page in the week before as they were making their signs to bring to the march. And they were amazed. It was amazing having all these sign makers out there doing all of this. And you can see a few of them there. So we dovetail with VEA sponsoring a rally, and we convinced them to move their rally from down in the corner of the Capitol to the Capitol steps. And we had to get special dispensation from that because normally they don't let people speak from the Capitol steps, but we did. So Kathy, the next one, that's the march coming through the streets. We marched about a mile from Monroe Park to the Capitol. Keep going. There's more. And this is what it looked like right at the Capitol that day. It was just a wonderful day because Virginia teachers had been so beaten down for so long that no one believed they had any power anymore. And in one day,
Amen.
they realized that they had power again. And I think it has been a real catalyst for what happens this year. So, Kathy, you want to keep going? There's a overhead of this. Go to the next one, Kathy.
Yeah.
We did not stop. This was the afternoon after we finished the march. The strategy team gathered at a nearby hotel and kept on planning for what next.
Yep.
They did not miss a step. It just kept going, even though the effort to do this had been gargantuan. And so this is the team after the march.
Yeah. And the what Cheryl has, this was our, like all of the strategy team that was there that day. The one thing that it has really helped is catalyze the actions for this year. So in November, we joined with the Legal Aid Society of Richmond and the Commonwealth Institute to form a coalition, Fund Our Schools, Every Student, Every Zip Code. And that has actually helped us get more traction. And we are continuing new demands. We did help flip the Virginia legislature. We've worked with other unions to push for living wage for support staff. We're currently working on collective bargaining. There's actually a bill in the House right now. And we are asking for full funding of new money for public schools to the tune of about $2 billion. And,
That's amazing.
excuse me?
So that's amazing.
Yeah. So Jamie, I guess it's time for you to introduce the next speakers.
Can I say one last thing? When we started this, they said it could not be done, and that if it could be done, it would take a minimum of 2 years.
Yeah, agreed.
We are in year 2, and we are already getting very close to recovering collective bargaining. So I feel great.
Good. Thank you so much. You ladies are amazing, and so is Virginia, what you guys are organizing. Kathy, if you'd stop the share, I'll try to share.
I'm trying to, okay, stop share. There it is. Thank you.
There it goes. Okay. Next up, I'm really excited to introduce this young man. He is named one of the 100 most influential people by Time Magazine for 2019. And we're really proud to have Jay O'Neill from West Virginia with us tonight. Take it away, Jay.
Hey, everybody. I'll just tell you a little bit about a short version of our story in West Virginia. You know, we don't have collective bargaining. We've historically ranked 47th or 48th in pay. And probably in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, they've also been cutting our health insurance every year. So that's also like a pay cut. And probably like a lot of you, I never forget the morning after the election of 2016, right? And just waking up and thinking, oh, what the hell just happened? You know, and realizing like, oh my God, I have to do something. And I think for me, that was definitely one of the big catalysts, and not just on the national level, but on the state level, and looking at things and thinking like, you know, I can't wait for politicians to fix this anymore, right? And I can't wait even for my own union leaders to fix this, because they're not. You know, and so we started kind of to bring people together. Most of this over Facebook, just, you know, initiating conversations. And for us, we're in a weird position because we have both the NEA and the AFT here are almost like equal sized. And it's kind of a weird thing because they don't really have separate jurisdictions. They're like all competing over the same members in the same districts. And so, as you can imagine, that's a lot of like this instead of, you know, working together. So we tried to bring people together over Facebook and just talk and see the commonalities that we do have. And hey, we're in this battle together. We're fighting for the same thing, regardless of union, regardless of county. And I think that's really key. because when people see that they're not alone, they're willing to be a lot bolder in their thoughts and what they want. I remember some on Facebook, some people were sharing like their bank account statements and how they had like $2 left until their next paycheck. And a lot of people were like liking, saying, me too, that's me too. And people realize, oh my God, it's not just me. I'm not the only person sitting here feeling like a failure because I can't even make it to the next paycheck. And it's like, no, we're all kind of being screwed together. And I think when people realize that, it kind of created a boldness, and so then when people start saying, well, here's something we can do, we can walk out, people are suddenly like, interesting. And, in my state, and probably like a lot of yours, we have a teacher shortage, and so when people started saying like, well, maybe we should walk out over this, everybody started thinking like, they're probably not going to fire us. They can't get enough people anyway. And so you just get this boldness as people began to talk to each other more and realize they're on the same page. And, finally here, thank God, some of our counties said, you know what, we're going to do it. We're walking out. They called it Fed Up Friday. And they walked out together. We just got lucky and happened to have a snow day too in some other counties. So there were even more people to flood the Capitol here than would have normally been there. And I think when the rest of everyone saw that, it was like the genie was out of the bottle and it wasn't going back in. People just realized like, oh my God, like, look at this. Look at the power they have. And I think people, it's a little like Cheryl was saying, like, teachers have been frustrated for so long. And so to see like, oh, here's something I can do about it, that really resonated with people. And so, here a few weeks later, we ended up having, there are a lot of steps in between. We did strike votes with all the unions coming together and everything, but we ended up having, all 55 of our counties, we have county school systems here, all 55 out for 9 days, shut down all the schools in the state. And it was an amazing experience. And one of the things I'll never forget is how you had these teachers that for so long felt defeated and just had kind of given up and frustrated, suddenly within days have realized like their collective power. And probably if you were paying attention, this part of the story, but after the fourth day, basically what happened is our union leadership kind of tried to cut a deal with our governor, really without consulting the members. Don't do that, by the way. It's a bad idea. But they came out and they kind of sold it to everyone on the steps because we were having NBC News broadcasting live. So we had a lot of teachers out there. And anyway, the leaders came out and said, hey, we've agreed to this deal. Tomorrow's a cooling off day. And on Thursday, you're going back to school. Suddenly these teachers that for so long had been passive and just seemed defeated were basically like, hell no, we're not going back. Are you kidding me? You didn't talk to us. People are shouting stuff like, back to the table. We're the union bosses. You're not the boss. And so then we ended up having like our wildcat moment of the strike, and we're out for 5 more days and ended up getting, most of what we were wanting and even a little bit better because we got a 5% pay raise for all public employees, not just teachers. And I want to point out that and you guys all know this in your states too, they were saying, there's no money for years. Yeah, we would love to help you, but there's just no money for your health insurance. There's just no money to raise salaries. Suddenly, everybody walks out and suddenly there's plenty of money and they can find money. So I think it's just a testament to like the power we have when we come together. That real collective power. Lobbying's not going to cut it. Emailing, calling your legislators most of the time is not going to cut it. But coming together and kind of collectively flexing our muscles, that works. And I think we're seeing that all across the country. So just to close again, I just want to reiterate, like, don't wait on someone else to do it for you. Just make it happen. If you feel that urge, that means you need to do something. So Anyway, I'll stop there, but thank you, everybody.
Okay. Thank you, and don't go anywhere. I'm sure we're going to have some people with questions. Thanks so much for sharing that. Exciting. I felt like I was reliving it again, and I was invigorated here in New York. People were like, we can't strike. You know, we got the Taylor law. I'm like, oh my gosh, we're losing battles constantly. So thanks so much for sharing that. Next up is a dear friend from Amazing Chicago. She's part of the leadership of the Chicago Teachers Union, who literally wrote the book on union organizing and activating your union. Michelle Gunderson, welcome.
Hi, everybody. What a great evening for all of us. And I want to thank the BATS for all the work you've done over the years. You've really helped a lot of teachers who feel isolated and don't know what to do, connect to something important and to build. And I appreciate your work very much. We've entitled this Facing Our Fears, and let's think about the things that have drawn us all together here. Courage begets courage. And a lot of times when we look at the Chicago teachers and what we've accomplished, we seem like this huge monolith of people that all walk together. And I have to tell you that transforming our union started with 16 people. And so you can very much start with a small group of committed people. If I say anything to you tonight, it's please take this energy and build something that's sustainable. And that's what we try to do when those of us who are activists in the Chicago Teachers Union reach out nationally. And it's the reason that we started UCORE with everyone. This energy is fabulous. It unites us, it builds our power, and it builds our strength. But it doesn't go anywhere unless we have a structure and sustainability to go with it. I think BATS has formed a sustainable group of people who keep the work moving forward. And I want to talk a bit about just old-time union precepts that I think as teachers we've forgotten. And I think we've forgotten the militancy of labor unionism and what it means to fight. So let's always make sure we're educating. I see in all of our signs we're educating, we're getting people together, we're talking to them, but we educate, then we agitate. And after we agitate, we organize. And these are things that are seared in the brain of every union organizer. Educate, agitate, organize. Mix and repeat, that there's no secret sauce. That's what you do to make it happen. I want to talk a little bit about Chicago and that it didn't start with everybody being on the same page. And when we talk about right to work states, Illinois is very prohibitive to the Chicago teachers only. There was a state bill that only related to us that limited our bargaining rights to bargaining over pay and benefits only. Those are our permissible subjects. And that we also had to have a 75% threshold to go on strike. It was said behind closed doors, and somebody taped it, that that'll put the nail in the coffin for the Chicago teachers. Well, we really proved them wrong, didn't we? And what we did in this last strike, a very difficult strike, 11 days out is incredibly hard to sustain and to keep everybody's spirits in the right direction. We aren't allowed to strike against pay and benefits, but we waited till the end to settle those. And so let's all talk about, don't you go telling us what we're not allowed to do. Let's all say that to ourselves again. Don't go telling us what we're not allowed to do. We still have the right of free association, and we still have the right of free speech, and we're going to exercise those. And so we fought for homeless supports in schools. We went on strike and spent almost a day negotiating terms for our preschools so that our preschoolers can nap. We fought for a social worker in every school, a nurse in every school. At the end, we settled pay and benefits so that they couldn't call it an illegal strike. We kept saying, we'll get to it, right? Which is one of my favorite phases to tell my principal, put that one in your hat too. You know, they tell you to do something new, just say, I'll get to that. So I want to demystify what we do. We're not this huge monolith that has all kinds of power that was given to us. We have power that we've accumulated and taken. And let's keep that in mind. Also, let's keep in mind that when we bargain, I hear all of us fighting for much more than just teacher salaries. I hear all of us thinking about children and futures and public education. Let's take a moment to think about bargaining for the common good and what that really means and what this world looks like when schools actually work. So I'm going to do a couple of things because I heard people talking about actions and strategies. I don't think that the other side ever realizes how clever we really are. And the cleverness of the signs and how people communicate so well and so strongly is always going to be a bonus on our side. But let's also make sure that we meet people where they are, and that in the end, what we want is strong workplaces for teachers, and to help people understand collectivism instead of individualism. I love seeing that in Virginia that Randy and Lily came, but let's always remember we're the experts about what's going on in school. You know, Jay, hats off to you about the time thing, but I bet you would have rather not had it done knowing you as a person, because there's can't be cult of a personality either. This is not on anyone's back. So meet people where they are. Think of a continuum of activism, because there are things in right to work states, and when people feel like they are really under the hammer, there have to be simple things you do first, because you build your courage as you go along. Yet on the other side, let's be bold. Let's have a bold vision of what we want for everyone. So if I can close, let's always remember to attach this work to our unions if we can. We own them, they're ours. We own the structures, we own the buildings, we own the publications. If your union's not working for you, people in CORE in Chicago, come out and talk with groups of people and help them start retaking their union. That's what UCORE is all about. You can read about it in Transforming, Jump Starting Your Union by Labor Notes. Rethinking Schools is having a new book coming out just this spring called Transforming Your Teachers Union. Labor Notes, I want to invite everybody to come to Labor Notes in Chicago. You will be jump-started yourself. So let's all say it. Educate, agitate, organize. You are the experts. Attach it to a structure and sustain it and keep it going. I love you, Bats.
Aw. Thanks so much, Michelle, for joining us this evening. Now, before everybody goes, I'd like to turn the meeting over to the director of BATS, Melissa Tomlinson, and we will be taking questions. Thanks, Melissa.
Thanks, Jamie. Michelle, that was a really wonderful note to end up on. I want to thank you very much for that. I see Wilma has put a question in there. I'm going to answer that one really quickly because I can. Labor Notes is in Chicago, April 17th, 18th, 19th. The two main days are the 18th and the 19th. I know tickets are going fast. Rooms in the actual hotel itself are booked, but there are rooms available at nearby hotels. I just booked mine, and I'm staying at one of the nearby hotels, but it's some of them are even within walking distance. Definitely worth a trip. It's only every 2 years, so it's a good opportunity now to go. Sue, you had put your hand up for a question earlier. Thank you for being patient. Sue, you're still on mute.
The sound on my machine is going like zit 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 like that. I'm sorry. Were you asking me about my question?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask Jay, because I had read somewhere in the reaches of my mind, that your superintendents helped you out with the walkout. Is that correct?
Yes, but I like with a caveat. We had like full participation of our what we call service personnel, so like our bus drivers and cooks and everything, and so we kind of didn't give the superintendents a choice. I mean, basically, it was like, no buses are going to run. There's not going to be any cooks there to cook the food, and no teachers are showing up. So they basically said, and especially in these rural areas where they really depend on the bus, they were like, well, we can't even safely have school. So they did shut it down, but especially in the first counties, there was no choice on their part.
I was just wondering if that was an organized thing, or if it happened centrally, or did your members go up to each of these superintendents and say something, or did you write letters, or?
No, like the county presidents for the unions would call the superintendents, the night before or a few days before and say what was happening. And then usually that was how it was decided. They're like, well, we don't have a choice. We can't have school. I do think when they saw the first ones do that, probably the others realized that was the easiest path. But that's pretty much how it happened.
Was that announced in the newspapers that it was going to happen like that?
No, not till it happened in the first counties. No.
Okay. Thank you, Jay.
We have a couple questions in the chat that I think might be good to discuss for a couple minutes. Somebody asked, what happens if your union doesn't support you? And somebody else chimed in, I'm in the same boat. I would love to know. When I first started getting involved in the union, it was because I felt very not supported by the union. I didn't understand what the union was, even, surprisingly enough. I got skyrocketed into all of this mostly because of my argument with Chris Christie, and didn't really get a lot of union support going forward from that. So I had to navigate all of the media attention and everything else on my own, except for one person that was a staff member of the union that reached out to me. So I very quickly learned the structure of the union and how to navigate it and what mechanisms were in place to allow for a democratic voice. But then I also just started talking with other people that had questions about the union as well, and that's kind of what our caucus does. We act like the union that we want to see. And because of that, other people have started acting like the union they want to see. And then because of that, the state union has been changing. One thing I've been pushing for years has been racial equity within the union and a space for educators of color. Well, this year, not just due to me, there's several people and several voices behind this, but they have created those spaces. So I've found that if you do the right thing when it comes to building collective power and doing what's right for schools, other people begin to recognize that's the right thing, and that's what they want to be doing as well. So you just kind of, that's what building collective power is kind of about, in my opinion. Jay, I saw you nodding. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you're right. Like, be the union you want your union to be. And if you don't feel supported, I think you just find some people who do support you and work with them and build from there, and please don't, best advice I could give, please don't worry about permission. Like, just do the work.
I think we're the scariest things in the world to business unionists who've had their jobs for a very long time, because there's a system of patriarchy in these unions where the bosses tell the teachers what to do, and we have to understand that system of patriarchy. But also, a good story is that Jackson Potter, one of our founders of CORE in Chicago, when his school was shutting down, he went to the union to ask them how they were going to fight, and they sent him to a resume seminar. And so that's like, I love that story, because that is when we were saying to ourselves, we've got to take over this union. You know, all they want to do is business as usual. And we want to build ourselves into a fighting union. We hadn't been on strike for 25 years. In the 2012 strike, I was a teacher of 25 years in the Chicago system. I did not know one person in my building or in my orbit who had been on strike. So we have to be thinking about, we are people who organize the way we do are a threat to our union, and people will do really desperate things to keep power. And I think Jay's example in West Virginia of the statewide bosses going behind closed doors and trying to cut a deal is one of the ones in the earliest future for us all to be looking at. Let's all support the We Caucus in Philly if we can, because they are very much trying to change what's going on in Philadelphia.
Sue, did you have another question?
Yeah, I did. And I wanted to say, first of all, I'm really encouraged by everybody's work. They've all worked so hard, and it's very encouraging. And because my initial union experience was not positive at all. So I'm going to say something very encouraging, especially to Michelle. You really are very inspiring to me. I look at your wall a lot. You're a good fighter, and you're a kindergarten teacher, I think. So who works with an art teacher. What I'm going to say to you is to all of you, is don't forget your art and music teachers. They are fighters. They've been screwed worse than you can ever imagine. They are isolated, marginalized. Their lunch duty goes away. They don't get planning time. They get screwed to the wall. I had a fist put in my face, and then I was not given lunch and not given planning time. And finally, I just got so tired I couldn't do it anymore. And they gave me 5 preps a day. And I don't know if you know any art teachers, but 5 preps a day for 5 different grade levels a day. It's an enormous amount of work. And I'm not feeling sorry for myself. I did it, and I did it really well. But please, when you're organizing, remember to include the art teacher, because they're usually the only one in the building, or one of 3 in the building, and they are never really supported with an administrative house. And the unions don't give a flying you-know-what about them most of the time. Even though most of our best union, Cheryl can tell you, some of our best union people are the art and music teachers down in Richmond. They are unbelievable. I mean, we had people retiring from Fairfax and going down to live in Richmond just so they could lobby. And then they advocate, and they're strong characters, and they've worked hard. They've dedicated their whole lives to kids, and they're just slept over. So please include them in your coalitions. Hi, Tina, I didn't see you there.
You're very 100% correct, Sue, definitely. Babysitters no more. Yeah, I find that my special area teachers get kind of the extra babysitting duties and the extra, we're going to throw a assembly during your cycle time. Anyway, we have a couple of announcements. I want to first thank everybody very much for joining us tonight, both in the webinar, the live stream in the Facebook group, and all of our speakers that joined us. Some amazing stories. And since we only kind of just started to dig into this a little bit within Badass Teachers Association, deeper conversations can be had around organizing and what it really should look like and could look like. So I want to officially announce everybody to join us in DC. We're going to be doing another BATS Swarm DC event this year. We'll be doing visiting our legislators for one day up at the Capitol, and then we will be doing a protest in front of the Department of Education, followed by a conference day in the hotel, All of the information will be coming out on that soon, but save the date for July 9th, 10th, 11th, and departing on the 12th. Right now, we're gathering speakers in our different committees before we open it up wide to membership. We're looking for people that really want to facilitate conversations, not so much as speak a panel and just kind of talk to somebody, something that we're learning very well from our wonderful people over at Labor Notes and in the UCOR caucus group. And then the second announcement is that this is the first of what we hope will be a lot of different live streaming events. And we have a next February 9th, we have the writers and producers of hopefully a film, but it may be a TV series called Parent Teacher. And I was skeptical at first of this project until I met with them and learned the background story and the messaging that they're trying to put forward in the public eye. And it's something that we've been asking for a number of years. A true view into what a teacher has to navigate within a school, within a community, and not just teachers, but teacher-parent partnerships. And I'm getting a message. Michelle, did you have something to add to all of that? No, you're good? Okay, just wanted to make sure. We are over our time, but we didn't go too far over, so I'm proud of that. Jamie, do you have anything else before we say goodbye?
Yes, hang on to your colleagues. The teacher that's teaching next door is going through, if you think you're having a rough time at your school, they may be too. It's time to band together to save our profession and save our public schools. That's all I have. Stick with the bats and we'll show you how.